All right, I think we are going to go ahead and get started because we have a lot to cover today and just an hour to do it. So welcome everybody to our second July edition of Working Behind the Scenes at CTA. Today we have the privilege of interviewing people who have worked on the Allstations Accessibility Plan. We're really excited to learn more about this on the 31st anniversary today of the Americans with Disabilities Act being signed. That happened on July 26, 1990, if my math is correct. So it's a great day, and we want to honor that by talking about ways that CTA is becoming more accessible as we continue to serve all of the people of Chicago. So without further ado, we're going to go ahead and get started. We're going to start today with some introductions of the team that's going to be speaking about the ASAP plan. We're going to do some questions for them, where they're going to tell us a little bit more how it came about, what it is, how far we are. And then at the end, as always, we'll have a question and answer session where we want to hear from our audience. We want to know what questions you have about the Allstations Accessibility Plan so that we can all learn a little bit more about it. So you'll see Q&A Marite there in the monitoring our questions as usual. So go ahead and send anything that you want to know to her, and we will try to get to as many of those as we can at the end. Once again, my name is Lindsay Istupinian. I'm your host for today. I'm the Manager of Outreach and Engagement and Human Resources. So good to be with you all once more. Marite, can you introduce yourself?
Hi everyone, my name is Marite Sandoval. I am the Coordinator in Outreach and Engagement. Thank you so much for joining us today. I think it's now our fourth working behind the scenes, so I'm super glad to have all of you with us. I've been with CTA for 3 years, and it's been a great time. And now that we're doing these working behind the scenes, it's been great to know and learn more about these departments that we have covered. So thank you so much.
Great, thank you. So now we're going to meet our panelists for today. Please tell us who you are, what you do at CTA, and how long you've been here. So we'll start with Tanisha.
Good afternoon. My name is Tanisha Marshall. I am the Vice President of Capital Construction here at CTA. I've been at CTA for almost 3 years. It'll be 3 years in November. Super excited. And I have over 20 years in background in construction, dealing with transportation and transit now. In my division, we manage between planning, design, and construction about $1 billion worth of transit projects. So very busy. And it's not possible without my counterpart, Erin, of getting the money in place for us. So, Erin.
Thanks, Tanisha. I am Erin Fiorini. I'm the General Manager of Infrastructure Capital Finance. As Tanisha said, my big role here at CTA in the Infrastructure Division is helping to find the money and make our projects possible by maintaining that funding as well, and making sure we're doing everything we can to get these projects out. I also am in charge of oversight of the program management contract that CTA has in the Capital Program Division. So we have about 50 or so consultants that are on staff to help us kind of manage our capital program from the beginning stages of early planning work all the way through the closeout of a project. And I also oversee the eBuilder, which is a project management information system, which some of you are probably familiar with if you've been engaged in any sort of infrastructure process to date for the program. I've been at CTA for about 16 years now. It'll be 16 years in October, so quite some time. And I've been part of this ASAP plan, the second wave of it, at least since it got reintroduced a couple years ago. Amy?
Thank you. Oh, Amy, you're muted.
I did that so if I was coughing, nobody would hear me. I'm Amy Serpi. I'm the manager of ADA compliance programs. I've been with CTA almost 9 years now. Wow. I have over 40 years doing things within the field of disability, ADA, disability awareness, etc. At CTA, I basically interface with all the different departments in terms of, I look at our construction projects as well as training, disability awareness, and other things. So it's really a job that takes me to a lot of different places at a lot of different times. So great to be here talking about this. Accessibility is near and dear to my heart. I happen to be a person with a physical disability. I'm legally blind and I've been disabled since birth. So the changes that we are making are really important to me as well as the entire community. Thank you.
Thank you, Amy. All right, we're going to jump right into questions. So the first question that I'd like Amy to answer is, tell us, what was the catalyst for developing the Allstations accessibility plan?
Okay, so 2015, I think there's a slide for this actually. There we go. So 2015, the 25th anniversary of the Americans with Disabilities Act, there was a big celebration. All different states and city departments, et cetera, participated. And at that time, Forrest Claypool simply made a statement that he was really going to work on making more of our stations accessible. But that's pretty much as far as it went. When Dorval Carter Jr. took over, that's really when things really got started. He actually took the statement and he made a promise to the disability community that things would go a little bit further in terms of developing an actual plan. So he wanted staff to put together a body to look at how we would make this legacy system accessible within around 20 years. And that's really how the whole program got started. It got, you know, when you talk about it, it's great, but you really need to have a plan in order to move forward.
Great. Thanks, Amy. So this next question is for Erin. Erin, can you give us an overview of what the Allstations accessibility plan is? What are the purposes, the objectives, and the goals that we hope to accomplish?
Sure. So the Allstations accessibility plan is really the biggest goal is to make our stations accessible throughout the system. I mean, that is like the number one goal for us at the moment. So far today, you know, we have a couple different phases of this strategic plan for implementing ASAP that we've, you know, carefully gone through and looked at the different criterion of how they get to be in the phases that they are. And I'm sure some of you will have more questions on that later about how we got to that. And there's definitely more detail to that in the plan. But, you know, CTA started out in terms of, Lizzie, if you can go to the next slide. With the passing of the ADA Act, you know, this had CTA really have to go back and take a look at what the system looked like. And there's a couple different things that we had this is prior to myself even being here at the agency for sure, look at the way that constructions of rail stations could be readily accessible and usable by people with disabilities. And then there are different requirements that needed to be met as part of this act that, you know, CTA and other transit agencies around the country also had to take into account and to identify, you know, what they could do and where they could do this accessibility work across the system. So in December of 2009, CTA did become compliant with some key station requirements that were part of that original ADA Act of 1990. And with that, you know, we had to make sure that those key stations were identified and made accessible. So those were done. And the next slide. So since this time, CTA's bus fleet has also grown from 0% accessibility to 100% accessibility. And then when the ADA was passed, only 6% of our rail stations actually met these ADA requirements. And today we have about 145 stations in total, with 103 or roughly 70% of them that are now accessible. So since that time of the ADA Act development, it actually has grown exponentially on the CTA system. So our phasing plan here that we're talking about today is actually going to show you how we're going to make the rest of that accessible. And you know, we've got really exciting things going on with the Rebuild State Capital Program that are going to make some of that actually possible. The whole part of the ASAP program actually began in 2012, where there was an infrastructure accessibility task force that was actually established to kind of take this next look after the ADA Act passed to see, you know, what can CTA do to help improve upon what they committed to originally. So that first group actually got together in 2010 and they published a report in 2012. And there were many different people that were part of that, that original committee, from CTA to the city to other groups that, you know, work with the disability communities throughout the Chicago area. And then, you know, with funding, you know, we were able to make some of those implementations from that IATF report with projects like Wilson and Quincy. Some of you, know that those are now completed projects and actually have accessible features to them. So back after Forrest made his announcement and Dorval committed to that in 2016, CTA got together this, what we call ASAP working group, which is the IATF group, but just like a refresh of that group, to begin collaborating again to take that 2012 report and, pulling in our resources at the time and other architects and other third-party experts to help really expand upon that and really come up with how can we make this accessibility plan actually happen in the next 20 years at CTA. So the working group, which I was part of one of those regular working group discussions, and so was Amy, we met a lot with MOPD and tried to get a bunch of different perspectives, looking at different concepts that were actually being developed at that time to say, how can we take, these stations and actually make them accessible? And then eventually to, well, how can we actually make this happen? So that's a very quick snapshot on the background of the program. There is a breakdown, which Tanisha is going to show you in the next couple slides, that show you how we're actually tackling that within the plan. So I will turn it over to Tanisha for that piece.
Thanks, Erin. Lindsay, can you advance the slide? So just a quick overview. For reference, also know that this information is on our website, transitchicago.com/accessibility. So this slide highlights the components of the ASAP program. This slide shows a chart from that breaks out the 42 inaccessible stations into 4 categories. So the first of these categories is ASAP Phase 1, which includes 8 stations, and I'll go into greater detail about those 8 in my later slides. We also have 16 stations that will be part of the future ASAP phases, and 10 stations will be part of the future phases of the Red Purple Modernization. Also, the remaining 8 stations will be part of a larger Forest Park Branch reconstruction program. So next slide. So this is how it looks. The current slide shows a diagram from the ASAP report laying out the 4 ASAP phases. All 8 stations in the ASAP Phase 1 are fully funded. Of the 8 stations, 4 of them are being advanced through the RPM program. Phases 2 through 4 each have about 5 to 6 stations that we plan to do over the course of these 20 years. So the great thing about having a phase implementation strategy is important to chart out a path for planning, designing, and constructing the proposed accessibility improvements of each station. This phasing is based on funding, complexity, geography, and incorporation of equity in the investments. Next slide, please. So going into the Phase 1 stations, CDOT is leading the reconstruction of the State and Lake. I think their ABC 7 actually had a clip on it. So hopefully you guys got an opportunity to see what the renderings will look like. But this station is one of our highest riderships. CDOT is currently advancing the design of this project. Once this design is finalized and the project is funded, construction is expected to take years, and its total estimate is $180 million. The remaining 3 stations in ASAP Phase 1 are the Austin Green Line, Montrose Blue Line, and California Blue Line. Next slide, please. So the Austin Green Line station is a $25 million project that addresses accessibility from the street all the way to the station platform and onto the train. A new elevator will be added, connecting the station house to the platform, which will be positioned on the paid side of the station house and centered between the 2 sets of stairs that connect to the platform level. This project is progressing through design with the construction start of fall 2022. Next slide. The The Montrose Blue Line Station is a $23 million project that will improve the station's vertical accessibility, including sidewalks, crosswalks, and curb ramps, installation of 2 new elevators, and other station platform upgrades. This project is currently in planning and moving into design with the construction start of fall 2023. Next slide. The California Blue Line Station is a $30 million project that addresses the need for accessibility at this station. Modifications include the addition of 2 new elevators, one on both the inbound and outbound platforms, as well as other new elements in the renovated station house to improve the accessible path. This project is currently in planning and moving into design construction to start late 2020. Next slide. So I'm happy to report that due to funding from the Rebuild Illinois Capital Program, CTA is able to accelerate one of the Forest Park branch stations, our Racine station, which will now be completed in ASAP Phase 1. CTA has just awarded the design contract and construction is scheduled to begin in late spring of 2023. Next slide. CTA is currently pursuing grant opportunities to begin the design efforts. This will assist us in being prepared for the future construction funding for the Irving Park Blue Line Station, which is in our ASAP Phase 2. The ASAP design will add 2 new elevators to the station by building or expanding the station houses located on the north side of Irving Park Road and east side of Pulaski Road for full accessibility. The existing station houses will be improved for better wayfinding. In the interim, CTA has just awarded a construction contract to replace existing escalators and also repair the canopies for improved circulation and passenger waiting environment. Next slide, please. So another project that's not part of the ASAP program, but currently underway is the replacement of the Cottage Road station. This will include a new elevator and other accessible features in the new house. This project is currently in design with construction scheduled to start in the fall of 2022. Next slide. The Damon Green Line is a new station that will provide improved access to the near West Loop area to transit. This project will make the station fully accessible with 2 elevators to connect the separate inbound and outbound platforms. CDOT is leading the design effort. Design is complete and the project is in the bidding phase with construction slated to begin. Construction is anticipated to take 2 years to complete. While Cottage Grove and Damon do not fall into one of the 4 ASAP phases, they will provide additional accessible upgrades to the rail system. Next slide. Also part of the ASAP program, CTA will include an elevator modernization program that will replace or rehab 162 elevators throughout the system. ASAP Phase 1 includes 40 existing to be replaced or rehabbed over 5 years. CTA has been able to identify funding sources for 20 of those elevators, with 2 being rehabbed at Logan Blue Line over a year ago. The typical useful life of an elevator ranges between 20 to 30 years, with elevators based on a variety of factors. The prioritization method includes 3 need-based criteria that are indicative of an elevator's overall condition. 1 being the station ridership, 2 being the age of the elevator, and 3, the total downtime. Next slide, please. So with our ongoing coordination with the ADA Advisory Committee, MOPD, and other support agencies, we implemented the yellow fiberglass stair treads at the Grand Station on the Blue Line. This serves as a color contrast for those who are visually impaired and a variation in texture and sound. Next slide. This was a pilot location that received positive feedback and support, and we are implementing this stair contrast as a standard when feasible and maintainable conditions exist. Next slide. Next.
All right, thank you, Erin and Tanisha, for that really thorough explanation. There's a lot going on with this project, which is a very understated way to say that, to describe it. But tell us, who are some of the individuals, the CTA departments or vendors who are responsible for carrying out ASAP? And Erin, I'm going to start with you on this one.
Sure. Between infrastructure and strategic planning, we've both been kind of leading this effort to push this plan forward. But we've also had the support of not only the ASAP working group, which included representatives from MOPD. We actually had one of our board members that was also part of this working group meeting too, Kevin Irvine. And then Amy was also on that group with us, but we've also been interacting with the ADA committee on a regular basis, just to keep them updated on the plan, but also to hear some of their thoughts of the concepts that we've put out there from the very beginning, to get any sort of feedback today that we can take back into our projects. Our goal is for us to refresh this plan, and refresh this working group to bring these groups together again to see where CTA is moving toward in the future, and incorporating, potential new elements into the stations that had always been tagged as kind of that next pickup point in the current ASAP working plan. Tanisha presented on the stair treads at the Grand Station, and that was one of those things that we piloted in the beginning when we kicked off ASAP, to say, what are other things we can add in to help enhance accessibility, and that was one of them. There's many other ideas that are coming from the advisory committee, the ADA advisory committee too, that we're going to take to heart in this next working group, getting together, looking at that, and then republishing this report with some updated information, which could include a little bit of changes on the phasing too, but that's all still be kind of worked out.
I'm going to jump in here and just explain. So if people don't know what the ADA Advisory Committee is, it's 12 members that are appointed through our chairman, and most everyone has a physical or some kind of a disability, and there is also people that interact with different community organizations that serve customers with disabilities. And we did this on purpose to get sort of a further view of what is needed within the community. We also rely on not only the ADA Advisory Committee, but also various community support groups such as Equip for Equality, Access Living, Chicago Lighthouse for the Blind, in terms of writing letters of support, et cetera, when we've needed funding. And an example of that would be for our Austin station. We were able to secure more funding due to the fact that people were willing to write letters. So that's an important element that ASAP works with the community.
Yeah, you led right into my next question, Amy, which was, in addition to all the teams and people involved in, in planning this project and then carrying out, how else are you soliciting input from stakeholders?
Well, I think each of the service boards also has an ADA advisory committee, such as we do. So in many instances, when people bring questions or concerns, I'm often aware of that, and I would forward things and have conversations with Tanisha, with Erin, with other departments. So that's another way I think that the public interacts in terms of this particular project.
Yeah, we've also had the pleasure of actually sitting on the ADA Advisory Committee and listening to different committees and some of their ideas as well. A couple of months ago, Amy actually invited myself and a couple others to sit on the Wayfinding Committee, which we actually, learned a lot by sitting there and listening to the feedback that we were getting. And those are good takeaways for us to bring forward to even just some of the current projects. If there's, slight things that we could either add in the current, but also analyze for the future. And that was just one small subset committee of the ADA Advisory Committee as a whole. There's many other committees that are there that we could take that input back. But, we also have feedback that comes back from writers and even people that work at CTA or other people at city agencies that, might have good lessons learned, and other transit agencies as well, to pass along to us, that we're all trying to gather and understand, what that could mean for CTA and how we can implement that forward.
Great, thank you. So definitely talked about this a lot already, but Just briefly, how is ASAP connected to the other CTA capital projects like the Red Purple Modernization and the Forest Park branch? Tanisha or Aaron, do you want to take this?
Sure, I'll take that. So previously, if you can scroll up on the slides for the overview. So what I just went through was our main phase 1 programs, but out of those 8 from phase 1, 4 of them are funded through the RPM program. And also RPM will have an additional 10 locations that they will upgrade to make it fully accessible. For our Forest Park branch, of the 8 that are listed here, 1 of them we're able to advance through our phase 1, which is the Racine Station, through the Rebuild Illinois monies.
Thank you. Right. So
I'm sorry, Lindsay, I'm sorry, one last thing. I think it's also important to note that when they did this study, and even like geographically, they went through all of the locations that were and were not accessible. All of the stations that are south of Roosevelt are accessible, and the ones on the west side are accessible with the exception of 3 locations. One of them, the Austin location, is being advanced through our phase 1. So.
Great, thank you. So tell us, and I'm going to ask you to take the lead on this one again, Tanisha, and then Amy to fill in any other pieces. But what was our starting point? Where was CTA with our rail cars, with our stations before this plan went in place? And how far we've come? We've talked about the phases already. So how many of the stations have been upgraded? How far are we to go? You know, what are some of the numbers you can give us?
So when this plan started, you know, the buses were 100% accessible and the rail cars were 100% accessible. However, getting into the stations were not. So I talked about the 42 inaccessible stations. We're moving into phase 1. So you have not seen much construction yet, but you will be seeing it within the next few years. So we're still kind of in the preliminary phases, moving into the 20 years of the ASAP program.
Yeah,
So
sorry. Go ahead, Amy.
No, I was just going to say, so in 1990, think about it this way, in 1990, when the ADA was actually passed, we had about 15 stations that were accessible. And when we're talking about accessible, I think people should understand that all of our stations, all 145, have some element of accessibility. If I might point out the truncated domes, in other words, the blue strips where the tracks are, that's a safety thing, especially implemented for people who are blind or visually impaired. We have lighting at every station. We have an actual physical person at every station. These can all be looked at as accommodations. This plan is really to move us forward in terms of elevator access and or ramps that will allow anybody with a mobility issue to access trains at a different level. So when we look at it that way, in 1990, we had about 15 stations where if you were in a wheelchair, you could actually get to a station and get on a train. And by the time we got to 2015, we were around 99 of our stations did have some way, whether it was an elevator or a ramp, to get to the platform level. And now we're at 103, but as you heard, we've got 4 of our RPM stations in process, and there's a lot of other stations that they're working on at the same time. So we've really come a really long way in a short period of time. And I want to say I work with a group that is sort of an interstate group. We have an accessibility meeting about once a month. And CTA is really far ahead of a lot of other places in terms of not only how many we've done, how many stations are accessible, but just in terms of the commitment that has come from our president. If anybody has ever heard Dorval speak, he always includes accessibility and people with disabilities in those comments. And I personally find that, refreshing and also really necessary. So I think it's just shown that we have not only a commitment, but we're really moving forward at a pretty good clip. And, I realize 20 years sounds like a lot of time, but when you're talking about $2.1 billion, it kind of puts it in perspective, I think.
And also just to note how we compare to other places, the Boston MBTA is 76% accessible. Chicago CTA is 71% accessible. Then there's a huge drop, like Philadelphia is 26% and New York City is 24%. So that was a percentage of a couple years ago. So there may have been some improvement since then, but we're right up there with Boston's percentage of accessibility locations.
Wonderful. Thank you. It's cool to see that CTA is the kind of the leader of the pack. That's exciting to be a part of that team, right?
Absolutely.
You know what? I'm also going to add, when you say leader of the pack, if anybody has been paying attention to the news lately, Tammy Duckworth announced the Allstations accessibility program for a national effort. And guess where she got that from? She had visited Chicago, and I guess she talked to Dorval, and she's like, I really want to borrow that. Is that okay? So that's kind of really neat that it started, that this program has really started a national interest and effort towards accessibility.
Absolutely, that is really cool. We will look forward to seeing how that develops. And that also leads into another question related to this project. So what additional resources are needed for this plan to come to fruition? We know that there's a lot that goes into something like this, people, materials, funding. So what else is needed, and where are you hoping that those resources come from? I'm going to have Erin take this one.
Yeah, so CTA, has been advocating for this program for a really long time now. We continually need support from, different agencies or different, entities that'll just help us get that funding in the background, whether we're competitively competing for funds specifically. I mean, that's where most of this comes from at the current moment. So any letters of support we can get from those groups or agencies to help that really is what helps drive CTA to get, that funding. With Senator Duckworth passing this ASAP bill, that's huge news for the entire, United States in general. But for us, like, this is the next way that we can advance the rest of the phases of this program by getting that federally dedicated funding toward it. And even if it becomes like a competitive program in that regard, like, I still feel that, all of us will be able to contribute to this really great cause. To get these plans pushed out across not only our system, but even for other transit agencies in the country. But definitely advocate for, advocating for this to happen at CTA is also something that's really important. And, standing behind this mission to make this program happen.
Great, thank you, Erin. One more for you. So what are some of the unique challenges that ASAP has?
Well, I think some of the challenges that we do have, there's a couple different ones. One, that CTA is a legacy transit system too. So there's a lot of things that we have to look at in terms of construction, right? And how we can fit in, an elevator in a station and, improve the path of travel that's there too. That can get complicated. Funding for sure is always an issue, because if we don't have enough funding to do it, we often can't bring this project forward and make it happen. Those are the two biggest things that we kind of face, currently in the current environment. The other thing too is there's other steps leading up to design and construction of a project that in the planning phase we have to pay special attention to as well, not just in like constructability, but also of environmental. And some people think, well, if you're doing an accessibility project, how does environmental come into play? Well, environmental comes into play especially when you have historic stations like CTA has, for as old as they are, and just in terms of how that's kind of categorized. If a station is more than 50 years old, it kind of gets tagged if you have federal funds, and in some cases state funds too, excuse me, to actually go through this analysis of, if there's historic elements, what can we do to actually, take that station, past this point and respect the fact that there's historical elements that we have to pick up within the project itself. So sometimes that presents challenges. It prevents a little bit of a delay, because we do have to do a lot of outside coordination with, historic preservation offices, both with the feds and or the state historic preservation office as well. But, we've got good relationships with all of them, so we can do that. It just takes a little bit more time to actually get that done.
Thank you. So this is just kind of my final question before we turn it over to the audience, but what else should CTA employees know about ASAP? Is there something we haven't covered today or something you want to emphasize, a takeaway that employees should have if somebody ever asks them about the project? Let's start with you, Amy.
Access benefits everyone. I use that as a tagline on my emails for many years. It really does. I mean, think about anybody with small children. It's sometimes easier to use an elevator. We do not restrict elevator access, and that's kind of an important distinction. Some of the transit systems throughout the different states will have signs saying, only if you're in a wheelchair can you use this elevator. And we don't do that. We understand that many disabilities are hidden. People may have different circumstances where they would need to use an elevator, et cetera, because obviously the more wear and tear on an elevator, the more, it could break down sooner, et cetera. But we do not restrict access. If there's an element in a station that somebody needs, they need it and they can use it. I really think it's important just to understand how access really does benefit everybody. And sometimes, there are challenges just within the different groups, so to speak. What works for somebody who's blind or visually impaired may not work for another group, and there has to be consensus among those groups. So that's sort of an important distinction, I think. But that's what I would think. It really does help everybody. And I bet there are, instances where people who are listening can think, yeah, I did use that escalator the other day because I didn't feel like trudging up the stairs, or I did want to use the elevator just because. So, I think that is an important distinction.
Yeah, I agree, Amy. I just, the ASAP program benefits all users of public transportation, regardless of one's ability, and provides greater inclusiveness, benefiting everyone by creating a rail system that is usable by all people. So I look forward to our ongoing collaboration with the disability community.
Erin, anything you want to add to that? What else should CTA employees know?
No, I think Amy and Tanisha covered that. I agree with both of those statements. That is really what's important.
I would add one more point. If there are people out there, if your family, disability is experienced by many, many people throughout their lives. Maybe somebody who's listening, their families have disability within their family or their friends. Encourage people when we are looking for letters of support to get funding, to make things more accessible. Maybe encourage those members of family to, write in and support these kinds of efforts, or your friends. That's really how things get done. As I pointed out, the Austin station, I think we got either 20 or $22 million because of additional support we got from people with disabilities or people interested in making things more accessible. So that's an important thing that people can do.
Thank you. Thanks all for your contributions so far. I'm going to turn it over to Marite and ask, I know we've got some questions that came through the registration, so let's start with a few of those, and then if there's anything that's come through the chat, let's ask our panelists those questions as well.
All right, we can start with who tests the accessibility plans to ensure they are inclusive?
Okay, well, when something is being planned, different groups work together. So we know what the regulations are. ADA, infrastructure, engineering, we come together. We will look at how things are going to be built. We may have input from different people, but there are actual regulations that the FTA has established, that the Department of Transportation, DOT, has established. So there are some pretty strict regulations. So when we are planning and building, we would first look at what those elements are. I don't know if Tanisha maybe wants to tag on to that as a person in construction.
No, you kind of summed it up. I think that due to our planning and coordination that's done prior to it even coming into construction addresses a lot of the concerns from the ADA Advisory Committee and the other agencies that we work with.
We also, in the planning process too, as these projects kind of, go through that, we do have checklists that we look at too to make sure there's certain criterion that we're meeting, and they're in our planning documents, which we call our project management plans. So there's a very high level look at that there, but even as you go through the process of design, like there's a lot of validation and whatnot that takes place in that process, and we do rely on a lot of our engineers and the architects that know the code pretty well too.
And even through that checklist, Aaron, there has to be a justifiable reason why a certain element cannot be incorporated.
That's correct.
Next question, what is the history of installing bus kneelers? What is expected of operators?
Well, I do a lot of that training. So, okay, when a bus is approaching, basically, especially if they see somebody that appears to have a disability, okay, you would maybe see a wheelchair, or you would see somebody who's elderly or somebody with a walker or whatever, they are supposed to automatically kneel the bus. There was the way in which our buses became accessible was through a couple of really intense lawsuits. In the year, what was it? In the late 90s, I believe, there was a lot of protests, etc. We started out with automatic lifts on buses. And unfortunately, in many instances, the lift didn't work or it didn't get deployed or whatever. And so in 2000, and I believe Dorval Carter Jr., our president, was actually part of this. He was one of the attorneys for CTA on this lawsuit, but we got sued a second time saying, you know what, the lifts aren't working. We need ramps and we need buses to be able to kneel. So it really was some of it through legislation, through a couple of lawsuits, but also as time has gone on, we have rules that, number one, anybody could ask for the ramp, so they cannot be refused. And we're talking buses now. And also then the bus should be kneeled if it appears that somebody needs that accommodation. A third thing is anybody that gets on a bus, if they appear to have a disability, the bus operator is supposed to ask if they need any assistance. Same thing at our rail stations. If a CSA notices somebody, they should be approaching and just saying, do you need any assistance? If the person says no, then no is no. They don't pursue it. But in some cases, people don't want to approach us. We need to approach them.
Great, thank you, Amy. Next question is, what is the geographical prioritization of station accessibility improvements?
So I'll try to sum that up. Of the 42 inaccessible stations, it's broken down into needs and complexity. Also, we use different qualitative considerations that are taken into account. As I mentioned earlier, the stations that south of Roosevelt have now been fully accessible. All but 3 on the west side have been accessible. So now it's broken into 4 different groups, which includes our CBD area, our north locations, northwest locations, and our west locations. RPM will handle a lot of those through our RPM program, and our Forest Park reconstruction program will handle a lot of those remaining locations. So even when we go through the 42 locations, complexity is looked at, the cost and time that is involved, and also the existing site conditions, the level of work. Some of our qualitative considerations is our geographics equity, also construction sequencing and coordination with the community. So a lot of different criteria goes into how we identify those locations.
Great, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
We have one question is, do bus operators get training for ADA?
Yes, that's the really short answer. I do and in-class training with them. And it's not just what they're required to do. It takes them through some disability awareness training so that they understand the why. You know, it's great. You can tell people what to do, but they really want to know why it is important. And so I try and give them the why as much as the what. And then the online instructors, the bus instructors, actually go with them and train them on things like how to use the ramp, how to kneel the bus, all the different kinds of lockdown if somebody wants to secure their wheelchair, etc. So there's a lot that goes into training, sometimes retraining if there are issues. But CTA has a very robust training schedule for bus and rail and CSAs. And all of them get accessibility, disability awareness, and ADA, as well as some of the hands-on training for the different things that they need to use when they're in transit.
Great, thank you, Amy. I have another question. Where can a customer rider complain to if they see a CTA employee not assisting someone with disability, like a bus or rail?
Okay, I'll do this one too. So you should either go to feedback@transitchicago.com, send an email. That email will go to our customer service department at the CTA, but it also then will go to, I get a copy of it. It will go to the garage where the incident, you know, if a certain bus route, wherever that route comes from, that garage, it'll go to those managers and supervisors. They will interview the operator. They will pull video as necessary. Remember, there's video for all of this stuff. So they will pull video as necessary. The person will, in some cases, be reprimanded. In some cases, there's, you know, depending on what the offenses, if you will, you know, it could be anything from just a write-up, a verbal reprimand, to, you know, discharge, to depending on what the element deals with. But there's actually something in place that addresses complaints. People can also call in to 1-888-YOUR-CTA and issue a complaint. I've often gotten complaints, and if I get a complaint, I will send it to feedback, and I will also contact the different garages, etc. In terms of getting resolution, in some cases, I can be told, you know, yes, we've interviewed the person, etc., but due to union policies and regulations, I don't always know exactly what the result was. In other words, I'm not going to be told necessarily if somebody was written up or this happened or that happened, because some of that is under union regulations. But you have to know that if it's reported, it does get attention. It will get looked at, and it will get sent on as appropriate.
Great, thank you, Amy. So we know that ADA turned 31 today. So it being our anniversary, have we had any feedback from the ADA community about our plan? Any suggestions?
Okay. No one else is going to talk. Okay. So I think one of the big issues, I think Erin alluded to it before, was our Wayfinding Committee. We have a subcommittee that's wayfinding. That's a really hot topic for any agency. And when we talk about wayfinding, it's how do I get from the sidewalk to the platform and onto the train. And Tanisha also talked about this when she was showing you some of those illustrations. I think especially was it Austin or Irving Park that shows the illustration that, you know, we've looked at from the sidewalk all the way into the station and up to the platform. Because when you talk about wayfinding, it's not just getting to the station, it's getting on the train. So I think that we do look at that. I believe we are going to be able to involve some of the people from the ADA committee into the next round of looking at plans, etc. Isn't that's correct, Tanisha?
That is correct.
Yeah, we wanted to involve people to look at those plans. And again, this is no easy task because honestly, you put 20 people in a room with disabilities, all different disabilities, you're probably going to get different answers and what works for different groups. So it's more of trying to get a consensus and looking at what the regulations are in terms of developing how we are moving forward on things.
I think it's also important to note that the official strategic plan went out in 2018, where there were several coordination meetings that were conducted that went into that strategic plan. We are now updating that plan. So we'll start kicking off some upcoming meetings here later on this year with a revision of that strategic plan to go out by 2023. So every 5 years, that plan will constantly be updated. And in the interim, you know, Amy, we have quarterly updates that are provided to the ADA Advisory Committee. That also is an opportunity for us to get feedback or some things that were observed or witnessed out there, like what works well, what doesn't, can certain ideas be taken into consideration. So we have several touch points where we collect feedback.
Great, thank you. One more question. Since the ASAP plan started, what is your most proudest moments that you feel accomplished, it's rewarding throughout this process?
I think one of our biggest things was winning the STP funds for Austin, because that really kind of kicked it off for the rest of it, but then also securing the rest of the funding for phase 1 from the rebuild program for us to do Racine, California, and Montrose. I mean, that was huge for CTA, because we went from having no money to then having all this money coming in from predominantly the state, but then getting that support from the federal STP program was like the biggest win for CTA at that point, because that really showed we were going to be able to at least start phase 1 and get this moving, and we keep applying for the future phases to get more money infused in that program.
That's great.
I think one of the things I am most proud of is the fact that we have a president and other people that believe in accessibility, that understand the need for it, and that want to do this. You'd be surprised sometimes of what the realities are sometimes out in different places and communities and just with different businesses. And I've been really proud to work with people on a team that really understand accessibility and really want to move forward in making things more accessible to more people, because they understand that it's not only going to bring us income and business, but it really is just the right thing to do. The heck with we know there's regulations and you got to follow the rules, but I think there has to really be a different kind of commitment, not just we're going to follow the rules, but it has to be something that really comes from the heart, that says we want to do this because it's the right thing to do, and we want people to be able to benefit from public transit. Public transit's really changing. So, we want people to be able to use it. And I think that starts at the top.
I think for me, just being able to see the commitment from our executive leadership and being able to implement and construct locations that are now inclusive for all users.
For sure. Thank you. It is really important. Having strong leadership, anything is possible with that. All right, we actually have one more question. What is the anticipated cost to maintain all of the new infrastructure?
It's a very big question. In terms of accessibility, if that's like what it's geared toward, I mean, that's a hard number right now to kind of come up with, because we're going back through and we do maintenance, but we also do certain like heavy maintenance on like existing elevators that are already out there. I can't really give you a dollar figure at this point in time, but we do have a facilities maintenance group that's part of infrastructure that actually has an elevator escalator department that is dedicated to making sure of this equipment that we have out there, it stays up and it stays running, based on the current ways and contract opportunities that we have for that to happen. And then, station is built, it's new, but it does need maintenance over time. So, you know, we're starting to collect more and more of that data to be able to talk to that more specifically.
For sure. Thank you, Erin. All right, I'll hand it back to you, Lindsay.
All right, I did have one question that came in directly to me, so I'm going to ask that and then we'll wrap it up. So I think this is for Tanisha when you were talking about the different stations and the changes that will happen. So will the State and Lake Station have a direct elevator down to the red line?
The answer is yes. So right now you'll have 4 elevators on each quadrant at State and Lake, and then you'll have 2 additional for overpass, depending on if they need to be on the inbound or outbound. We'll also be adding an elevator from the street level down to the subway, and then another one once you get in the subway to the platform.
All right, thank you. All right, well, that about wraps it up for us for today. So a huge thank you to Amy and Erin and Tanisha for sharing your knowledge about the Allstations Accessibility Plan. We all know that it's a really important plan, and we all know now more than we did an hour ago how important it is and all the work that's gone into it and all the work that has yet to be done. So thank you for everything you've done. Thank you to your teams. You know, we can only have a few people on these calls, but we know that there are huge teams behind you also doing work, many, many people involved at CTA and the various advisory committees and groups that you all work with. So thank you for all the work that you've done so far and all the great things that are going to happen over the next several years to make sure that the services that we provide really do impact all of the public and are accessible for everybody. So thank you, thank you. Thank you to all of our attendees for joining us today and learning more and asking your questions. We always appreciate that participation from you all. If there are other groups you want to learn about, you can email us at employeeengagement@transitchicago.com, and we want to learn about all the teams at CTA. So tell us who we should prioritize. A recording of the session will be available on the CTA Doors Opening YouTube channel, so you can revisit that after today or send it to a colleague if you think they would be interested in learning more. But once again, thank you, everybody. Have a great rest of your day. Have a great week. And join us next time in August, where we're going to be talking to rail station management to learn a little bit more about what they do behind the scenes at CTA. Thank you, everybody. Have a great day.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.